All righty. Well, I've talked recently, past couple of weeks. Um, I've talked about the term worship and how there are a lot of folks that when they think about worship, they only think that it refers to that hour or so on Sunday morning when the church gathers together. And that's true to a certain extent. That is worship. The Sunday morning service should be a worshipful experience. But that's certainly not all that there is to worship, because that's not all that there is to life. We need to realize that worship, just like walking in the Spirit that I talked about last week, is a lifestyle. It's a 24-hour a day, 7-day a week experience. Because we have so many great churches in this country, we can develop kind of a bad habit. If we're not careful, the habit of critiquing the worship service happens instead of fully participating in the worship service. I think there are times when we find ourselves evaluating the musicians, evaluating the song list, evaluating the message, not on how well these things impacted us spiritually, but on how well they were performed, how well we liked them. And if they don't measure up to our standards, we say something along the lines of, I don't know, I just couldn't get into worship this morning. The keyboard was too soft. The guy leading the music was too loud. And did you hear that wrong note in the choir? I just couldn't get into worship. Now, on a side note, I want to say that as a worship leader, I certainly strive to make every aspect of the service excellent. We want the music to lead you into God's presence. And we want the message to be uplifting and life-changing as well. And we do all of this because we should do everything in life with a spirit of excellence. But the simple truth is that we don't hit a home run in every area every week. And if the only way that you can get into worship is for us on stage to be brilliant all the time, you're missing out on the heart of worship. Matt Redman is a great performer and writer of music. He wrote 10,000 Reasons, Better Is One Day, Blessed Be Your Name, and of course, The Heart of Worship. Let me briefly tell you about how The Heart of Worship came about, in case you weren't aware. If you know how this song came about, if you know the background of it, you can zone out for a couple of minutes, I guess. So back in the 1990s, Matt Redman was leading worship at a church in England. The church had a worship band, singers, top-notch sound and lighting systems, the whole 9 yards. And Matt's pastor began noticing that the congregation was growing and coming, but it appeared that they were there more for the free concert than they were for the gospel message. So the leadership decided that they needed to change some things up. They began meeting in a different building. There wasn't a stage. There weren't any instruments or any fancy lights. The pastor said that they needed to begin focusing again on God, not on all of the trimmings, if you will. So before the message, they just open it up to the leading of the Spirit and have folks either pray or even sing a cappella. And then others would join in. If somebody just felt like a certain song and it was welling up inside them, they'd start singing a cappella, and then everybody else would join with them. Matt has said that it was very awkward to begin with because there was a whole lot of silence. Over time, though, they began to sense the congregation was coming with the expectancy of actually meeting the Lord. There was a renewal towards the Lord and in their fellowship. So they ended up setting a date to move back to the original worship space. And Matt felt compelled to write The Heart of Worship, which dealt with what they had all gone through. The first Sunday that they were back, Matt sang this song using only his acoustic guitar. And I'm sure you all, many of you know, The Heart of Worship. When the music fades and all is stripped away, and I simply come, longing just to bring something that's of worth that will bless your heart. I'll give you more than a song, for a song in itself is not what you have required. You search much deeper within. Through the way things appear, you're looking into my heart. I'm coming back to the heart of worship. And it's all about you. It's all about you, Jesus. I'm sorry, Lord, for the thing I made it. When it's all about you, it's all about you, Jesus. That's the heart of worship. It's all about Him. It's all about Jesus. It's not a matter of how well everyone performs on this side of the stage. It's a matter of where your heart is. I've been in all kinds of churches throughout my life. I've been in services where the guitar was hopelessly out of tune. I've been in churches where the organist played with a volume like she was personally trying to vibrate down the gates of hell. And I've been in churches where the sermon was long and dull. And throughout all of that, I was able to connect with God in a very real, very personal, very intimate way. I've also been in services where the music was awesome. There was drama that was thought-provoking. The sermon was dynamic. And I've left some of those services just as self-willed and hard-hearted as when I walked in the door. It's not about the production. It's not about the quality of the service. It's about the state of your heart. So tonight, I want us to look at coming back to the heart of worship. This is a crucial lesson to learn if you want to get through life with your faith intact. Being a follower of Christ should mean that you'll be involved with a church, but you can't focus your eyes on the church. It means that you'll participate in the songs that we sing, but you won't focus your eyes on the worship leaders. It means that you'll learn from the message and the Bible studies, but you won't focus your eyes on the pastor or the teacher. So tonight we're going to look at a story in Isaiah 6 that teaches 3 things that you can do to get back to the heart of worship. We're in Isaiah chapter 6. If you haven't turned there yet. First of all, this passage teaches us to get focused on God. A common obstacle to worship is our own personal resentment towards other folks in the church. Let's not kid ourselves. We're all human, and sometimes there's friction in our relationships. If your eyes are on a person rather than God, it's going to hinder you. I honestly can't tell you how many people I've met over the years who've said they don't go to church anymore because so and so made them mad. And I'm sure you've known quite a few folks that applies to as well. Or the church is just full of hypocrites. Look at what we see in Isaiah chapter 6, verse 1. Listen to this. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord seated on a high and lofty throne, and his robe filled the temple. Now, Isaiah mentions King Uzziah here. And in some ways, he had been a very good king. But he was just a man, and he made quite a lot of mistakes. His reign was during a time of prosperity for Judah. But the book of 2 Chronicles says, in 2 Chronicles 26:16, says, but when he, that's King Uzziah, became strong, he grew arrogant, and it led to his destruction. Basically, King Uzziah decided to rewrite the rules of Judaism, and he was eventually struck with leprosy. Isaiah begins this chapter by saying, regardless of what happened with King Uzziah, I saw the Lord. My eyes weren't on the king, my eyes were on God. If you want to get through life with your faith intact, you need to do the same thing. Get your eyes off of people and start focusing on God. Instead of looking at people, focus on God's majesty. Notice what Isaiah says here. I saw the Lord seated on a high and lofty throne, and his robe filled the temple. Instead of looking at people, focus on God's holiness. Jump down to verse 3. And one called to another, that's angels, holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. Instead of looking at people, focus on God's glory. The rest of verse 3 says, his glory fills the whole earth. When you come to church, don't look at people. Look at God. Look at his majesty. Look at his holiness. Look at his glory. But also understand, this doesn't just apply to Sunday mornings. It applies to every day of the week. If we're not careful, we can let the imperfections of other people prevent us from focusing on God throughout the week. Maybe your spouse isn't a model Christian. Don't let their imperfections prevent you from seeking God every day. Or maybe your neighbor claims to be a Christian, but you don't like the way they do their business. Well, don't let your neighbor's imperfections prevent you from seeking God's presence. If you want to get back to the heart of worship, if you want to develop a worship lifestyle, get your eyes off of people and get focused on God. And if we as a congregation, united, will do this, the same thing will happen here that happened in Isaiah. Listen to what he wrote. Look in verse 4. The foundations of the doorways shook at the sound of their voices. The angels proclaimed God's glory so loudly that it shook the temple to its foundations. Wouldn't that be something? What if during this next Sunday morning, in our worship time, we all sang so loudly that the dust started falling off of the fans and out down from the ceiling? Wouldn't that be phenomenal? I think it could happen. but we have to get focused on God. The second thing that we need to do to get back to the heart of worship is that we need to get cleansed by grace. There's something about seeing God for who He is that causes us to see ourselves for who we are. Isaiah, I witnessed the glory of God. And now look in verse 5. It says, "Then I said, Woe is me, for I am ruined, because I am a man of unclean lips, and live among a people of unclean lips." Now, you know that I read normally out of the Holman. That's what these have been out of. Let me read this verse out of the easy-to-read version of the Bible. It says, "I was frightened and said, Oh no, I will be destroyed. I am not pure enough to speak to God, and I live among people who are not pure enough to speak to Him." There's a story in Luke where Jesus told Simon to put his net into the deep water. Simon answered by saying that they had worked all night and had caught nothing. But he continued by saying, "Yet, if you say so, I'll let down the nets one more time." Simon didn't exactly sound enthusiastic about doing this because he was tired. He'd been out all night. But you know what happened next? They caught so many fish that their nets began to break. And in fact, when they began to drag the fish up into the boat, there were so many that the boat began to sink. Peter realized that he was in the presence of more than just a man. He realized that he was in the presence of the living Christ. And then look what happened. In Luke 5:8, it says, "When Simon saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, 'Go away from me, because I am a sinful man, Lord.'" That's what happens in the presence of God. Pride suddenly melts away, and we become aware of our own sinfulness, our own inadequacy. It's not that God wants us to acknowledge our sinfulness merely for the sake of talking about how wretched we are. We acknowledge our sinfulness to experience the transformational power of His grace. Go back to Isaiah. Look what happened next. Look in verses 6 and 7 here in Isaiah 6. It says, "Then one of the seraphim flew to me, and in his hand was a glowing coal that he had taken from the altar with tongs. He touched my mouth with it and said, 'Now that this has touched your lips, your wickedness is removed, and your sin is atoned for.'" That's the purpose of being in the presence of God. We acknowledge our sin so that then we can experience His forgiveness. Getting back to the heart of worship means that we recognize this crucial truth. We aren't able to approach God on the basis of our own worthiness. We approach God only because He made us worthy through the blood of Christ. Because Jesus died on the cross for our sins, we can be in the presence of our holy God. The book of Hebrews says in Hebrews 10:10, "By this will of God, we have been sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once and for all." The act of worship involves recognizing our total dependence on God's mercy in our lives. We don't approach Him proudly. We don't approach Him on the strength of our own good deeds. We approach Him with humility, with a sense of gratitude because of His forgiveness for us. And when you have this attitude, it's impossible to get distracted by the singer who hit a bad note. It's impossible to get distracted by any superficial thing because your heart is directed toward God. What this means in our day-to-day life is that we don't need a concert atmosphere to enter into worship. We don't need any instruments, a song leader, or anything else. You can worship Him alone in the privacy of your room. Just you and Him. Folks, if you have to rely on us for you to go into worship, there's going to be a problem. Because I'm not coming to each of your houses just to lead music. Now, obviously, it is important that we come together as a body and worship together every week. But this isn't the only time that worship takes place. It should take place in your own life 7 days a week. Coming back to the heart of worship requires that we get focused on God, we get cleansed by grace, and then thirdly, we get ready to go. Go back to Isaiah. Look at verse 8. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, "Who should I send? Who will go for us?" I said, "Here I am. Send me." Worshiping God and working for God go hand in hand. Our best response to worship is to say, as Isaiah said, "Here I am. Send me." Here are a few things that I've learned about worship. First of all, right worship leads to right living. Our struggle with sin is not so much a matter of badness. It's a matter of awayness. I know that's not a word, but it is now. The awayness, us being away from God, is what leads to badness. When you have a one-on-one encounter in the presence of God, it affects you the way you spend the rest of your day. It affects what you say. It affects how you respond and treat people. Do you want to become a better person? Do you want to be holy? Then spend time with your holy God each and every day. Right worship leads to right living. Also, right worship leads to acts of compassion. It's impossible to be unmerciful to others when you've just experienced the mercy of God. It's impossible to be unforgiving toward others when you've just soaked in God's forgiveness. And it's impossible to turn away from the needs of others when you've had a personal encounter with God's goodness. How we treat others matters to God. And the only way to get to where we need to be is to become worshiping people. We can't be satisfied with just a weekly nod to God. Worship must become an everyday priority. As a church and as individuals, we need to stick to the heart of worship. We need to get focused on God, get cleansed by His grace, and get ready to go into the world and do His work. That's what lifestyle worship is. Now, in the event that someone says, okay, but how? How do I worship God when I'm alone? Well, here's what you do. It's pretty darn simple. Get alone with God. Sing some songs to Him. Even if you can't sing. It doesn't make any difference. Nobody else is listening except God. And I got news for you. Even if you are the worst singer in the world, if you sing worship songs, praise songs to God, He's going to consider it a concert. Spend some time in prayer. Open your Bible and let Him speak to you through His Word. If you don't do this every day, at this point, I challenge you to start. Make it a habit. And I guarantee you, it will change the way you interact with every person around you. And then that's going to change the way they interact with you. It will change the way you respond and react to every situation that comes your way. And it will change your perspective on what happens in here on Sunday mornings. Bottom line, it will change you through and through and begin making you into the likeness of Jesus. Take out your prayer sheets if you would.